For people unfamiliar with you, if you would, please tell us your name, your background, and really what you've been doing for the last several years.
Sure. My name is Peter Carter. You should be able to tell by the way I speak that I originate from England, from the UK. I've spent most of my professional life in Canada. I'm a medically qualified doctor. I'm retired now. I live in coastal British Columbia, between the cities of Vancouver and Victoria. And I've done a lot of family medicine, also a lot of emergency medicine, but I have a long background in environmental health policy, environmental health protection policy. I got into that many, many years ago. Started off with basically with air pollution. And there've been a lot of really important, interesting research on air pollution, and then I moved on to toxins, pesticides, children's environmental health, which was a sort of new term at the time of focusing on children, because of course they're very vulnerable to toxic chemicals and to pesticides. And then I sort of naturally, because the issue of global warming, which we now call climate change, they're both pretty unhelpful terms, because that was getting more and more serious, and really nothing great was happening which was being done about it. I just focused on that completely, and then I retired, so I had all the sort of time in the world that I could do with it. And so I followed all the research of one of your other guests, James Hansen, and in 2008 he made a public statement that the world was in a state of climate emergency, planetary emergency is what he called it. And I thought, oh yeah, well he's right. He didn't get a lot of support from the other experts. So I decided that I'd have to do something that I never planned to do, which was to get involved in doing websites and, trying to do a few YouTubes and things like that. And actually, as you know, because you're a videographer, it's pretty creative. It's kind of fun. So I got into a lot of that. I started and a Climate Emergency Institute. It's an online institute, and it's been really rewarding. I get in contact with experts and doctors and people in the poorer but more vulnerable regions of the world. And then I through the institute I get involved with inputs and consultations with the UN departments and the FAO, that's the World Agricultural Organization, and so it keeps me busy, and because I'm busy, I don't get too depressed about things. So, I just been talking to a gentleman who's got a really good healthy product in your event here, and yeah, he said, well, it's pretty depressing when you listen to this stuff. So that is a problem. That is a problem for us. And I started about 6 years ago writing my own scientific articles and getting published, and then traveling to the big international science conferences, climate change conferences. So I've done quite a bit of that. I only travel for climate change. So it was very good to get invited here, and I get to see a bit in New York, I guess, at least.
What is your book, Unprecedented Crime, Climate Change Denial and Game Changers Survival, about?
Mm-hmm. Sort of by chance. I put on a little climate change educational event in the city of Victoria, and there was a lady there about the same vintage as myself, And she sort of grabbed me and said, I really need to talk to you, because she said, I've been following climate change for years. She says, I've been to every United Nations climate conference, and yet we don't seem to be making any progress. And she said, you're obviously sort of immersed in it, so I'd really like to get together with you and see whether we could do anything, right? So we did that, and she's a very, very good writer, which I'm not. That's basically because I write for science journals, so my writing sounds pretty boring, and so this was a really good partnership, because she was a very, very fine writer as well as a fine researcher, and although she got no science background, she knew a lot about climate change. She picked up a lot of the information and understood it over the years. So we looked around, and another thing that James Hansen alluded to around the same time, around 2008, I think, was that the CEOs and the big corporations, big fossil fuel corporations, they were really perpetrating a crime, on the general public, on the world, pretty well. So we looked to see whether there was a book on climate change and crime. I knew of academics, professors in the field that worked on that and did research on that. And we were somewhat surprised to find there wasn't a book. So we said, okay, well, let's write the book. My sort of thing is to explain to people, that we are in a climate emergency. I call it an Earth emergency now, because the climate system is basically the whole Earth, really, not just the climate. And then, of course, there was the issue, this is pretty hard stuff for people to take, so we're going to have some balance here. So she came up with the idea of game changers, and that was really, really the fun part of the book. We're both researching, what was the best cutting edge, renewable energy, all the science and technology. And the more you go into this, the more amazing it is. I mean, it really is phenomenal. So more than half of the book is solutions, is game changers. And then there's shorter chapters at the beginning about the various aspects of, the extreme immorality, no ethics on, And then at the back, I got an appendix, which I'm going to be redoing soon, which was basically the state of the planet. And we put that at the back that people could go to, and then they could refer to that if they wanted to. And surprise, surprise, just a couple of days ago, I actually found that we got some royalties. So the book's paid for itself. So the publisher, a relatively small publisher in the States here, they were very, very supportive, because it's not the most popular topic, should be, but it's not. And so it's really nice when, we actually get a little bit of royalty back. So we know the book's doing okay.
Guy McPherson is very pessimistic about humans surviving even 10 more years on the planet. What do you think?
Oh, Guy's a really interesting person. I've had a little bit of exchange on the internet with him, not much, but a little bit. And one of the exchanges was that at that time he was saying that the human race would be extinct in 30 years, and basically it's not possible, right? That's impossible. We couldn't even do it with a nuclear war. But I gotta say something positive about Guy McPherson, because he's one of the few people who highlights what are called the positive feedbacks. Now, the positive feedbacks are, they lead to tipping points. there's been a recent climate journal paper on it, which got a lot of media attention, so that was good. It was called, the media attention when they called it Hothouse Earth. So I must give him a lot of credit for that. And the reason is that the experts in climate change, they shy away from all of these feedbacks. And I mean, I've tried to understand why they shy away from it, and I can't really. But it must be in some way that, as I've always realized, the very worst impact of global warming, or warming up the surface of the planet, is to heat up the surface, and inevitably the soils and particularly the permafrost, which there's been a big research paper just recently. The permafrost is well known, but the Arctic sea ice melts, the snow melts, the forests dry up, the forests burn. So there's all these feedbacks. So global surface warming makes more global warming. What is called the theoretical science, the basic science, has always predicted this. So now, of course, we don't only have the models projecting it. I mean, it's happening all over the place, right? So he's one of the very few people who have recognized that really what we should be talking about is the feedbacks, right? The environmental community has going way back to the late 80s, they've been very concerned about that. You know, Greenpeace published on the feedbacks, and I think they called it a boreal or an Arctic carbon bomb when they, going back more than 50 years, when they got a scientist actually to publish a paper for them. So he's right, and yet the other thing that I can't understand about Guy is that he says, well, we're all going to die, and so you should just, you know, rest back and be a good person. Sounds reasonable, but that's not me. You know, if something's as bad as this, we're in an evil situation right now, no question about it. So really, as a human being, you know, we've got to respond. We've got to fight this thing, you know. That's what we do as human beings, right? Rise to challenges and fight and overcome stuff. So I don't appreciate that part of his sort of mission, so to speak. Now, I will say one thing, though. We could be committed already to an uninhabitable planet. I really wish that he had expressed himself like that. I got to think that the idea of near-term extinction was sort of a controversial, spectacular way, perhaps, of getting some attention. So it, you know, it's probably perfectly genuine, but it really is a huge exaggeration, you know. And now I think he's saying that human race is going to all be gone in 10 years. I think that's the latest thing. Oh no. So we can carry on fighting, and we must.
If there was unlimited money and total cooperations between countries, what technologies, solutions, or products exist to reverse climate change or take greenhouse gases out of the environment?
Okay. That, of course, is that's a big thing. And on the runaway thing that I just mentioned, I do want to mention it sometime. Maybe I can do it now. One of the good things about climate change is, and the issue, is our current United Nations Secretary General, who's called Antonio Gutteres. Now, his predecessor, Ban Ki-moon, was absolutely superb on climate change. He was saying, you know, we are headed for catastrophe. You know, we are in an emergency. Not many people have been calling climate change an emergency, which has obviously been rather frustrating for me. But he was really good on this. So when, of course, he had to step down, his term was up. So I sort of worried that, oh boy, we probably won't get anybody as good as Ban Ki-moon. This gentleman, Antonio Gutteres, is great. And he really made some very true, I sort of tend to call it the terrible truth, statements, which are not easy statements for a world leader to make. In May of last year, 2018, at a world summit being held in Austria, he made the statement, and this is very pertinent to your first question. He made the statement that climate change, he said, I've got all of these big problems, right, that I have to deal with, but one of them is way bigger than all of them put together. He said, and that's climate change, because climate change, he said, is an existential threat to most life on the planet, and particularly to humanity. And then he went on to say that we could and we had to, get off fossil fuels, and we had to make the switch to clean, renewable energy. Now, I was lucky that I picked it up, because none of the media carried it. My co-author, Elizabeth Woodworth, that's one of the things in the book that she did the chapter on how responsible or irresponsible is the media on, sort of nobody realizing, really how bad this is. And my view is that sometimes the media has been really quite good, and then other times they seem to have gone to sleep on the issue. But I was really disappointed that they didn't pick up on this statement. I mean, that was a historic statement, So he made, subsequent to that, in September, at the UN, he made a similar statement on 2 occasions. That was picked up a little bit by the media, but not enough. I mean, these should be front-page headline, right? I mean, come on. But I guess the media doesn't like to do that. And on these statements, he said that he was very specific. He said, if we don't turn things around by 2020, and I'm well aware of this because I've been working on that for the past 10 years, then we risk passing a threshold in which we go into runaway. So they were courageous for a statesman to make, but they were absolutely the truth. This conference is called The Truth About Health, and it's a really great conference. I've enjoyed listening to all the people here. It's been fascinating. And a really good feeling at this conference, by the way. There are people here who, who are the best of humanity. In the news, we sort of hear a lot about the worst of humanity, so that's nice. His statements were directed to, the United Nations has a climate conference every year. So they had a big one last December in Poland, and he was there, and he pushed very hard to get like Copenhagen in 2009, which was unfortunately a big failure. He pushed hard to get all the countries to get really serious about dropping their emissions fast. But again, he wasn't successful. So we have to carry on fighting the thing. So you started with the big question about, which is a pretty common question out there now. People are getting an idea that, okay, then things probably are very bad. So do we have to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? Well, of course, the first thing we do, and the other question that goes along with this is, can we reverse climate change? So my response to that is, first of all, we have to reverse our emissions, right? So our emissions are going up. They went up a huge amount last year, 2.7%. It's a massive increase in emissions, which are, calling them sky high is an understatement. So we have to reverse emissions, and that language was used by the IPCC, that's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their 2007 fourth assessment. They had their last one, big assessment, was in 2014, and then they've had this big report, special report out, which I'm glad the media carried very well, which was called the 1.5 degree C report. Well, in 2007, I watched on the United Nations TV, and I was very impressed that all the lead authors, all of them, stressed that we had to start dealing with this now, and their quote was, because global emissions have to have been reversed by 2015. So here we are in 2019. Emissions are still going up. So we need to put the attention on that, right? Because we are gone. I mean, we are toast. We have no future if we don't get our emissions coming down. I mean, literally, we have no future. So that's true. Second part is that the science has, for many, many years, been definite that we do have to develop the capacity to remove some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And that's because of the nature of the gas carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide lasts forever in the atmosphere. Our emissions practically last forever, hundreds of years. And, and so we've always had to get the carbon dioxide emissions down to practically zero. It's like a bathtub. If you're filling up your bath and you've got a little tiny, let's say you've got a tiny plug in the bath, let's say, okay? You know that all the time you're putting water in it, if you've got a tiny, tiny little plug, your bath is going to overflow, right? Well, we're pretty well there already. So you can't actually get down to absolute zero. We can't do that because even with the best of our agriculture, we've got to assume that we're going to be releasing some carbon. So the scientific models on this have always told us that we would have to remove a little bit of carbon. And we thought it was a little bit of carbon, okay? But now, and this is now survival, Guy McPherson is right on that. He's not, by far not the only one that is saying that this is a survival issue. People have been saying that for many years. And, it used to be survival for massive populations in the most vulnerable regions, particularly in Africa, etc. But now the emissions have been put up so high, our carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere is so high that we're looking at a survival issue for all of us. Getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, a lot of money has been spent on it. And so far, the success has been very, very limited indeed. The most popular, if I can put it like that, or the impression that has been given by the IPCC and the scientists, that the way that we could perhaps make this happen was called, and is called, Bioenergy Carbon Capture Sequestration, or CCS, you can call that carbon capture and storage. I've never liked the idea because it means burning a lot of wood, and then you've got to assume that you can capture all the carbon dioxide, 100% from burning the wood, and then you've got to assume that you can find somewhere to put it which is safe, and then you've got to assume that you've got enough wood, and then you've got to assume that if you're burning all this stuff, you're not doing other damages. I was glad to read, I was an expert reviewer on the October 2018 IPCC 1.5 degree C report. And I was very glad to see that when the final report came out, they said that the science is less and less interested in this bioengineering carbon capture storage because of all these problems. And that the interest was increasing to the other method, which sort of is the obvious one in a way, which is called direct air capture. So the idea there is, can we capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? You know, we're not talking about. It's interesting because, you know, the fossil fuel corporations, of course, for forever have been saying, well, when things get bad enough, we'll just capture the carbon dioxide from our coal plants and diesel plants, you know, and then we'll bury it somewhere. A ton of money has been spent on that, and it's not been successful. So, but however, there is some really, really innovative research being done on getting it out of the air, which, I mean, these are trace gases. They're in tiny amounts. So, you know, when you think about it, you think that's impossible, but actually it's not impossible. Close to me, north of Vancouver, there's a company that actually is doing it. They've used research, many years of research at the University of Edmonton, and to put it simply, it's sort of giant fans and chemicals that soak up carbon dioxide. And they can do it, and you know, they're making it pay for itself because they can make a fuel, and then they can sell the fuel, which of course is not the best way, but it's really encouraging that a relatively small company can actually do this, and you know, can be successful in the business, and can make some, rather like my book, I heard recently, we're making a little bit of royalty out of the book, so that's very encouraging. So it's encouraging that this company can actually capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, bring it down into a state in which they can modulate it, you know, they can do stuff with it so that it ends up with a fuel that people can burn. Now, having said that, what we need to do is we need a zero combustion economy is what we need. That's the scientifically accurate term, and it gets around all of these things that really are the public. There's so many things about climate change which the way they're presented, you know, is completely mystifying for the public, you know. And that's been a continuing problem. And one of them is, you know, net zero, low carbon, there's all these terms, right? And the simple way to get around that is we got to start burning stuff. We need a zero combustion economy, and that we can do. We can do that. Yeah, we're going to have to get some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but of course, the more carbon dioxide is building up, and it's something like, it's way higher than it's been in the past 800,000 years. We know that from the ice cores. It's about 37% higher now than it's been in the past 800,000 years. And it's going up all the time. So if we haven't got there already, we'll very soon get there, in which even if we come up with a successful technology, you know, we're not going to be able to remove enough, and we're not going to be able to remove enough fast enough. So there's a big problem with the, it's being called negative emissions, right? There's a big problem with the idea to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, even though it's always been done, because there's no question in my mind that out there with people who are involved, you know, in climate change in one way or another, they're thinking that, okay, things are very bad, but, you know, we'll just work on it a little bit more, and you know, we'll be a few more years down the line, and then we'll just have to remove more carbon dioxide, right? And they say, you know, this will cost more, and no. The longer we wait, every year that we delay now, we make it completely impossible to deal with this monster, right? Completely impossible. We may be there already. We may be beyond the limits of our best inventiveness, and our best resources, right? Even if we get emissions down to nearly zero, which is what the IPCC says we have to do, it will become, people have, there's a lot of euphemisms being used in language of climate change, right? People don't like to say really how bad it is. And one of the euphemisms is that, well, if we delay, that's not going to be really a good thing, because it's going to be more expensive for the next generation to deal with. That's not true. It's getting more and more impossible for the next generation to deal with. And right now, one of the things that I do is I've got a few websites. And one of the things that the most recent website I started was I decided, okay, I use my websites as my research libraries more than anything. So they're not that much of a sort of customer-friendly website, if I could put it like that. So I realized that I should put all the data that I'm checking every month, and I should put all that on one website, because there isn't really a website that had all the data at the time. There's somebody else who has a very good website which is similar, and he started doing that. His name is Michael, and he's in British Columbia, and he's not a scientist, but he did a brilliant thing. He started putting out every month the atmospheric CO2 concentrations, which wasn't being done. You go to NOAA and you can get the data. And so now I think his website is called CO2 Earth. So he does more than CO2. Anyway, I have this website. I call it the State of Our Climate, and so I follow month by month what's happening to all the indicators, as they're called. They're really direct effects of greenhouse gases. So I follow those every month. And right now, it's really difficult because people have to know the truth, and the truth is just getting worse and worse all the time, right? For the past 3 years, I've been going to international. There are two big international science conferences in the world. One was held every year in San Francisco. It's called the AGU. That's the American Geophysical Union Conference. Huge, massive, tens of thousands of people. And the other one is the European Geosciences Assembly. And they have that in Vienna. So like I say, I only fly for the climate. So I have managed to visit Vienna on a couple of occasions. Beautiful, beautiful city. Very environmentally aware city and community as well. And I present my data, and I said, well, we're getting close to most of the industries I've been explaining are probably accelerating, right? I had some of which I wasn't too sure of. There wasn't enough research. As of yesterday, now, the situation is so bad that I'm now putting out the trends. These are data trends. These aren't projections in the future. These are actual measurements. No disagreement about them whatsoever. Every single trend is now accelerating. Everything. Greenland melting is accelerating. A paper published January, this month. The Antarctic ice sheet, the melting is accelerating. A paper published this month. A huge shock, Couple of days ago, may have been a week ago, anyway, very, very recent, another paper this January, on permafrost. The the scientists had never had an opportunity to get together and measure all over the world. They do boreholes in the permafrost. They put, heat sensors down there. And they've never been able to do this everywhere in the world, even on Tibet and the glaciers. And now they've completed this huge project that they've measured them all, and they have them all up to 2016, which is very recent for science, actually. And most of them are accelerating. And the ones that are very clearly accelerating are the ones in Siberia. And Siberia is huge, it's massive. It goes on forever. And it's nearly all permafrost, solid as rock, permanently frozen ground. The scientists expected that they wouldn't be seeing any of the permafrost thawing until the end of this century, probably next century. So they're pretty shocked because it's thawing already. 2015, 16, 17, 18, and that thawing is already releasing more greenhouse gases. So that's the feedback thing. That's the situation that can lead to runaway. The worst possible scenario that the experts do tend to shy away from. They're doing the research, right? But there's definitely seems to be a reluctance to get this out to the public. It's probably difficult for them to handle, I suppose, But we're not only looking at the future of the human race, as the United Nations Secretary General said, we're looking at practically all life. All of this life we live in the greatest age of life ever. There's never been more life on the planet. It's going down rapidly. But there's never been more species, more abundance, more variety in the oceans and on the land. And the age that we live in, the post-dinosaur extinction age, is called the Cenozoic. We call it the age of mammals because it is the age of mammals, right? And we're mammals. But also, it's been a huge, prolific increase in abundance and variety of flowers, of insects, of birds, all those things that we love, I wonder whether really, the education has been really, could have been more helpful on climate change. Do children, know about the age that they live in? Do they know that they live in the Cenozoic? Do they know that this is the past 60 million years, and do they know that life has been increasing and increasing and increasing? I don't think they do. I don't think they get very much of that, right? So, it's now. It's today, The economists have not been terribly helpful. There's been a back and fro from the scientists and the economists. The economists have tended to say that according to our economics, what we should do is we should wait, right? Economists, I guess all scientists think they're the most important scientists, right? So economists, economics is called a science, and I guess they think they're the most important scientists. Well, they don't know ecology, they don't know biology, they don't, okay? But they're still saying this. They're saying that we should, economically, we should wait, because maybe later on down the line, we'll have better resources and better technology, right? And then it'll be easier to do. Well, of course, climate change is exactly, as I've explained, the other way around. So the economists generally have been unhelpful. Now, there have been exceptions. The Stern Commission, UK government, Nicholas Stern, he's now Lord Stern in the UK. So they did this big Economics of Climate Change that was published in 2006. And they dispelled this idea, you know, because they worked out economically what the cost would be if we allowed the global temperature to get to close to 2 degrees C, which at that time, and that's just a number, which at that time was the limit. And there was just no comparison. You know, the economic costs were massive, massive, and now we know they're even bigger. So the economists that have said that it's sensible to delay are absolutely wrong. They're wrong in every respect. But unfortunately, some of the leading economists are still saying that, which is incredible. We've had more research recently. The World Bank has been very helpful. They've had their economists review what the economic costs and benefits are. And so they've come up with a couple of papers that have been very definite, you know, that it's mitigating climate change, you know, stopping the pollution, it's economic benefit all the way. And it's not a cost. One thing that's been very off-putting, I would think, particularly for the public, is that mitigating, dealing with climate change has always been presented as a cost. Okay, well, actually, it's not. You know, because you have to do a cost and benefit. I mean, obviously, there's investment to be done, there's money to be spent. But in climate change, what you're doing is you're preventing massive, I mean, we're into billions and billions of damages now already, you know, and every year the costs are getting higher from, you know, these disastrous climate change-driven impacts all over the world. And so when you do an accurate cost and benefit, you end up with a huge net benefit. So it's very unfortunate that people have got into a habit of saying, well, you know, even the environmental organizations that, well, you know, they mention that climate change is a cost. It's not. It's a huge benefit. So we've got all these problems to deal with, actually. We got, you know, we got a number of reasons, I guess, when I've gone through them, that nothing's happening. Nothing is happening. We've got some. We got the young people are savvy. They may not know the details, but they're getting the message that we really let them down. We've really, my generation has really let them down badly. And you know, they're starting grassroots groups of their own. One of, if not the best one in the world, is started up just a few years ago in the States here. And that's called the Climate Mobilization. They understand it. They understand the science, they get the science, they're totally dedicated and quite passionate. And they're doing a city-by-city emergency project now. And it's being pretty successful. They've got quite a number of cities, I think probably about 10 or a dozen by now. Municipalities who have made a declaration statement that we're in a state of climate emergency, and we're going to develop a plan to deal with the emergency. One of the things actually I should remind myself better of is that the Climate Mobilization hired an engineer. His name's Mr. Mitchell, and he produced a plan. I think the first one was in San Francisco, and he's brilliant, this guy. He's got a comprehensive, detailed plan on how cities can get to a net zero situation. And, nothing's more convincing, than reading something by an expert which is detailed and said, okay, this is how we do it, So they're great. In a way, there's a similar sort of movement, youth-orientated grassroots that started in the UK, and they've chosen a name which is pretty appropriate, which is called Extinction Rebellion, and they're into non-violent protest as well, as trying to push the politicians and trying to work with the municipalities. So these people, they got a lot of publicity. They closed down 4 bridges in London. I don't know whether you read about this, but oh my God, it's an amazing thing to do, absolutely amazing. So, and now there are groups spreading up all over North America, and Extinction Rebellion groups. They know that the problem is now one of survival. And the interesting thing about this group is they've been founded on the basis that there's nobody that is doing anything, substantial about the problem, and that they're just going to have to do it themselves. They're going to have to work it out, and they're going to have to, the opposition, of course, is absolutely terrible. The opposition to doing anything on climate change. Our book was called The Unprecedented Crime of Climate Science Denial. So we were addressing the campaign that's been going on since it started in 1989. Okay, that's when it started. That's when Exxon and all these big companies funded what should I call it? Funded their PR project, okay, with lots of money, to confuse the public, right, deceive the public, and they've been very successful. So I've mentioned a few reasons why we have problems, that there's no progress being made. But of course the big reason is that. The big reason is this campaign, which goes on, and they're terrible. They attack leading academics working on climate change. They literally attack them. Then there's legal cases. They've got deep pockets. They just keep going on and on. So if it wasn't for this opposition, we would definitely have dealt with this years and years and years and years ago. And today, we'd be on the cusp of a true golden age for humanity, because we would be already on 100% clean renewable energy. There'd be no fossil fuels, no air pollution, right? No water pollution, no greenhouse gas pollution. These damn fossil fuel corporations, they can become energy corporations, right? I mean, there's tons of money being made out of renewable energy, right? But they just have a nasty, nasty mindset. And anything that is energy, they see is a sort of enemy, right? So they've got to beat that enemy, right? Well, in doing so, the fossil fuel corporations are an enemy to all life on the planet, because that is the result of what they're doing. Now, this is going way beyond denying the science, right? We know that. They have lobbyists, and the American administration, I guess every single one is a well-known climate denier. That means a liar, there's no getting away from it now. And similar situations happen in other countries. Canada's not much better than the States. We have a Liberal government in Canada. They are putting tons of money, government money, into pipelines, pushing tar sands, and we have to get down to, the IPCC 1.5 degree C report was excellent, very, very good report. And particularly because they came out with specific numbers on our emissions. Not many people may be aware of this, but they had worked out the limits of how fast we had to come off oil, coal, natural gas. You add it all up, I added it all up, by 2050, fossil fuels in total will be down by a minimum of 86%, which of course is the industry's gone and it's all been replaced, right, by clean renewable energy. So that was very, very useful to have the IPCC say that. The media did pick up very well on the other number, which was that by 2030, emissions of carbon dioxide, which is primarily from burning fossil fuels, emissions of carbon dioxide had to be reduced by 45%. But that was from 2010. So today, we have to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. We can do that easily, because the IPCC also did a special report some years ago, I think probably maybe 2012. They did a report on renewable energy, and almost the first thing that they said in the report was that there's no limitations on replacing fossil fuel energy by renewable energy, because in 2012 there was plenty more renewable energy that we could put online that would replace all fossil fuel energy. So, hey, people have known that for years and years, Discovery Magazine, Scientific American, they've been looking at solar energy for the States, and they've been putting out things for years. So, but the 1.5C report was great. It gave the politicians absolute limits in numbers, which has been the cause of the worst thing that government leaders and the fossil fuel industry has ever done. And that's what happened at the last United Nations Climate Conference. It was the 24th Climate Conference, so they call it COP24. We've been arguing and negotiating for 24 years on whether the planet's going to have a future. 24 years. It blows my mind. Anyway, what happened then is we have every few years we have a report, huge assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They're very conservative assessments, right? That's well known. They have policymakers on their panel, and they have to negotiate stuff, and so that tends to be rather watered down. Let's put it like that. It's not the cutting edge science that they and they don't do risk. They do what is most likely according to their models. Anyway, it's routine that the last assessment will inform the next United Nations conference. So that's how the thing was set up. That's how it's worked, and that's what's been going on since 1990. So the last conference was in Poland in December, and so the Polish team that was running the conference, so they tabled the last assessment, which was the 1.5 degree C assessment. Okay, and 4 countries blocked it. They argued and argued, and they never got the best assessment that the IPCC has ever done. Certainly the most important one. It never got tabled at the conference, which means, according to, governance and things like that, that doesn't really exist. They have to wait until the next conference to see whether it's tabled. So these four countries, of course, are Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has at every conference done all it can to sabotage any good result, right? Then there was Kuwait. There's two others, Russia and the United States. So we have Russia and the United States, right, in partnership, right, to sabotage efforts to replace fossil fuel energy with clean renewable energy and give today's kids hope of a future. That's where the hope word comes in, I guess. You know, give them some hope that they're going to have a future. That was the most evil thing to do. Terrible, 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 terrible. That's way beyond denying the science. You know, that's forcing the science out. So, well, we got to push on. I mean, you know, as I say, it's a monster. The fossil fuel energy power is a monstrous thing, and it's been around for a long time, but has to go. You know, we make progress, don't we? You know, we bring in use changes and all kinds of things, and we're on the cusp, you know, of the biggest progress, the biggest progress that our species has ever made, right? In which we have unlimited amount of energy, right? And we can use all our best ingenuity to use that energy. And the energy is 100% safe. You know, there's no side effects, there's no fallout, no problem from the energy. You think about that, right? Not only that, but the more energy gets used, the better the energy becomes, right? Because that's driving the science and technology all the time, and it's amazing right now. And the more of the renewable energy that gets used, the cheaper it gets. So that's happening already. Unfortunately, the huge advantages, you know, this prospect of a true golden age for humanity, in the terms of you know, the money power, you know, the worst aspect of capitalism. That's probably the reason why they're at war with. They probably see renewable energy as a competition, which is absolutely stupid. They should invest in it, for heaven's sake.